This is goddamn blood. Good evening. This is Jack Webster, live at 5 with my new program. And if any of my sotto voce remarks were heard just now, I do humbly apologize. The Premier, Bill Vander Zalm, has in some way been delayed for his appearance on this program this evening. And I have a number of very important points. He will be here very shortly. I have a number of very important points to put to him, because while we are all entranced and charmed by his ad-lib promises, some of which are very good indeed, and while we have all been, I suppose, influenced for the good by some of his actions, to wit his direct involvement in the British Columbia government civil servants affair, which he stepped in after shilly-shallying by the previous administration had gone on for weeks and months, and he solved it forthwith. Mind you, he had to apply a certain amount of extra dollars or two to get that settlement, but a civil service strike or continued tension was not something that British Columbia needed. Similarly today, the appointment of Mr. Justice Hank Hutchin as a convener, as distinct from a mediator, in the IWA Forest Industrial Relations dispute is a step in the right direction. I don't happen to think that you can solve that dispute this year in that particular way, but who knows? And certainly it is a good move, to say the very least, because the economic state of British Columbia just now is, to use that old-fashioned word that I say now and again, parlous, P-A-R-L-O-U-S. And one of the things I want to talk to Mr. Vander Zalm about is the fact that he knows as well as I do that his current deficit this year, more money spent than coming in, is something in excess of $800 million. The Bennett administration, of course, piled up, racked up, in many cases essential, some think, a score of $1 billion in deficits while they were in power, and the economy of British Columbia wasn't doing as well as it should do. And I think that the public, and don't forget, we've been promised the most open government in history by Premier Vander Zalm. Now, he obviously is going to control his cabinet in quite a strong way, but we will expect from him in the weeks and months ahead, but especially when he calls the legislature, if he does, some specifics. We will expect specifics on conflict of interest guidelines. You may have noticed on the 4:30 News that he has investigated the Waterland affair, and he has referred it, I believe, to the Attorney General's Department. More interestingly, from a public interest point of view, is his own position. Is he going to be full-time Premier of British Columbia, or is he going to be a businessman? Is there going to be any more money for education, especially in the post-secondary grade? Does he appreciate the incredible unemployment about youth? Will there be more money for welfare? Will there be a general election? What about the $25 million loan in U.S. cash, I believe approved for Louisiana Pacific against the wishes of a number of influential people in the lumber industry in British Columbia? Will there be a Site C, or is that down the tube? Will there be any mega projects, or are they all down the tube? Is he serious about taking off the transit levy? Is he serious about cheaper beer for the workers? Is he serious about some of the, and then of course, what about his own personal philosophy in relation to the laws of British Columbia? Is there going to be a very strong emphasis on provincial interference, on provincial laws? And of course, I'm touching a very delicate subject which I normally avoid, that of abortion in British Columbia. Will we find out the true cost and effect of the restraint program? Will he hold an investigation into, for instance, the way the previous government ran their consultative processes with the boys in the back room? I'm glad to tell you that Premier Vander Zalm has arrived in the studio. I apologize again for what I said off the top, and I shall be back with the Premier after the break. it was August the 6th when Premier Vander Zalm came like a bolt from the blue and took over in that strange convention at Whistler as the Prime Minister of British Columbia. You didn't even think it was going to happen, did you?
Of course I did.
You knew you were going to win.
Obviously, yes. I went in to win and worked hard during the campaign, and I felt I was on a bit of a good run and that I would win in the end.
And you are still dedicated totally to open information about your government, is that correct?
Yes.
And about your own personal philosophy?
Yes.
You've made many friends with some of your promises. Don't you think you've been a bit too loose with your promises when you're facing a current deficit of more than $800 million this year?
Well, there will be changes made. I can't talk a great deal about what the changes made. As Minister of Finance, I'm obviously having to review all of the programs, and I will need to come in with a budget that is acceptable, and I'm sure I can do it. There will be some tax changes, no doubt.
Would it be that you are planning an early election so that you can face the public as a brand new, clean Premier without having to answer for the sins or omissions of the previous Social Credit Administration?
Possibility.
What kind of possibility?
Well, you're trying to scale me 1 to 10? I really can't give you a figure, but I would say that obviously the system as we know it now says that you call an election when you think you do best.
Have you dismantled the old consultants who offended you in some way, and will you go on your instincts, or will you set up a new organization for polling so that you know best when to go?
Well, there won't be near the polling that perhaps was done previously, because I'm not great on polls. I'm pretty good at getting a feel out there, meeting the people in the various communities. So much of it will be done by me, and it'll cost a lot less money doing it that way, and I think somehow maybe it's more accurate too. Having said that, we obviously can't do all things ourselves. There will be the need for consultants. You made some reference to consultants that might have offended me. Well, I'm not offended very easy.
You said at one time that you were going to have an investigation of the Sentinel Group and even the top 20 to see whether anyone had preferential access to the Premier's office. Are you going to have that?
I think an investigation may be a bit of a strong statement. It sort of makes it appear as though we're going to get in the RCMP or all of that sort of thing. No. But we will definitely be looking into what the procedures, how they were handled, why they were handled a particular way, who got the contracts, and what the process, in fact, for giving out the contracts.
Do you have any feeling for the need to have such kind of organization for yourself?
Well, there will be, no, not the need for an organization that's out there representing a particular segment of the populace, although they might be a representative of everyone, it could be argued, but I think they're more representative, say, of the business community. And I don't see the need for having an organization out there permanently to give any sort of way
You'll
into
save
people.
a lot of public money on that. Is that correct?
Well, if you're talking about the top 20, those people were really a gathering of business people
Sentinel
that
Group.
helped. Oh, the Sentinel Group. Okay, well, the Sentinel Group is a consulting firm, and they've worked not only for government but for the private sector, and they'll continue to work for the private sector. I don't really know just what it is they're doing for government, which is what you asked me earlier. Will you have an investigation? Yes, I'll look into it.
Mr. Vander Zalm, one of the crosses you have to bear is your rather tough attitude towards education and welfare. Will you have money to improve the educational system now that it's been trimmed a bit, and to give money to the post-secondary institutions?
Well, I think there's ways of perhaps assisting the educational system monetarily without necessarily going to the public for more money, number one.
In other words, no, you're not planning to respond to the academic pressure for more money for UBC or for the public school system.
Well, I can't, first of all, I can't say that there won't be more money. Yes, there probably will be some additional monies. And some of it will come from the Excellence in Education Fund. There's a sum of money which has been allocated legislatively, but we still have to fund it. So there is that.
Will there be more money for people in welfare who haven't had a raise for 4 years?
I hope so.
You hope so?
Yeah.
It's not your priority, though.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that it isn't my priority. I just haven't got to all of the things. And what I'm hoping to do right now is get some of the things in the economy settled and in order, the people back to work, develop some means whereby we can attract more investment into British Columbia, get some new industries going. Jobs is certainly a priority. Now, a good economy will look after all of the other problems. However, I agree, a lot of people have been waiting a long time for some increase in the welfare rates. And I know that I would argue, others might argue, that there's abuses of the system, but we should try to segregate the abuses from, in fact, the people in need and the fact that they haven't seen an increase. So I would hope there's an increase.
A very basic question on abortion. Is it not a fact that our abortion procedures are controlled by federal law and that you have no right as a provincial premier to stick your nose directly into that?
Well, the federal government has the law governing abortion procedures, and it requires that we establish at every hospital a committee that, in fact, looks at the application from one for an abortion, and then rules as to whether it's a matter of health, mental health to the individual that they, in fact, receive the abortion.
We know the law, but you don't like that law, do you? With respect, you don't like it.
I'm a pro-life person, so obviously I don't like it, but I have to respect the law. I want to make sure, and I suppose as a provincial person, it's my obligation to assure that the law is being carried out as it was intended to.
In other words, because of your personal dogmatic beliefs, you will watch very closely that there is no misuse of abortions and no expansion of facilities?
I don't know that there are dogmatic beliefs. I think perhaps not too many years ago, everybody believed the same thing. We've had a liberalization in that belief, fine and dandy. And, I think the beliefs that I carry with me or that you carry with you into your job obviously have an effect on the way you do things.
Of course.
So I would be remiss to say that it doesn't have some effect on it.
Do you favor one large public school system, or did I hear correctly that you would like us to allocate our school taxes to public or private schools as in our choice?
Well, there's a problem with going to a system of pure choice on the basis of you allocating by choice your taxes to the institution
you want that
you
Mr.
want
Premier?
Your children to attend. There's a problem with it. I think perhaps ideally it sounds great, and perhaps it's something that most people could favor if all things were equal, but they're not equal. We have some areas where you don't have a choice because you've only got one type of system. So I think if at best we could hope to try it out in one area, and whether it's in the post-secondary system or in the elementary, probably in the post-secondary, and again in some region of the province where in fact there is the opportunity for choice, and see what
that's what you would like to see. You would like, you're going to have a test in one area where people could allocate their taxes to the religious or private school of their choice.
I think it would be interesting to give people the opportunity to allocate to the institution of their choice and see what the result of that. I'm not saying it's going to work naturally.
Wouldn't it smash the public school system, which is already sorely starved for funds?
Why would it? If the system is effective, if it's performing the sort of function that people would expect of it, they're going to be supportive of that particular system.
In other words, they can stand or fall on their effectiveness among the community.
I think that's certainly how you attain accountability and how you see improvements develop within any system. So I don't mind a trial effort someplace, although I don't know what the area or how you do it. I'm only saying I don't have a closed mind to the idea of trying it.
Yeah, mind you, that's the kind of thing that leads to division in communities, is it not?
No, not necessarily. I think there are many places where, in fact, people now have the choice. And, if people are happy and satisfied, and if they're content with what they're getting, and they believe they're obtaining value, chances are you'll have a better community.
But you have a predilection away from the public school system if people don't want to support it.
If they don't want to support the public school system, would I what?
You have a predilection for separate parochial and private schools. No, you've made that clear, certainly.
No, my children attended public school. Now, for a time, a couple of them went for 1 or 2 years to an independent school. But for most of their lives, they attended public school. I attended public school for most of my life, and frankly, I think it has a place, too.
Are you still going to push for prayers and Bible readings in all schools?
No.
You're not?
I didn't push for that. I had the opportunity when I was Minister of Education. That's not to say I wouldn't like it. I think it's great if people would, in fact, see this instituted in their schools, more power to them. I
How
think
about
it's
gambling,
very good.
Premier Vander Zalm? I've known you for 20 years. Are you serious about bringing in gambling with all the assorted, dreadful people, drugs and pimps and corruption that is attracted by large-scale casino-type gambling?
Well, first of all, boy, you're laying it on pretty heavy there. Just a moment now. It depends, I'm sure, a great deal as to how you go about it. You and I know there are places in Europe, southern Europe, I suppose everywhere in Europe, Germany, Holland, England included,
But we're North
where
America.
where they have gambling, and it's very closely controlled in casinos, and they don't appear to be having any problem. All I've said in the past, and I say it again, if it's a moral thing we're worried about when it comes to gambling, we've obviously given up on that because we have gambling of the worst kind, in that whenever you enter a grocery store anywhere in British Columbia, you're confronted immediately by some machine that tends to say that you're going to win $10 million or become an instant millionaire, and there's probably 6 signs over top saying they've got a better lottery still. So it's everywhere in British Columbia.
So you give
we've
up?
got bingos and we've got small casinos. So in principle, we've already said it's okay. When it comes to the larger casino, obviously it's a question of politics. Now, we know that there's tons of money, there's busloads of people, airplanes every day, heading down to Las Vegas and to Reno, and it's become a major industry employing thousands of people. What I've said is if there's some community, some resort destination, I mentioned Whistler at the time, that may have been a mistake. Probably they don't want it. Maybe they're even afraid at the name, at the mention of it. But, you know, there's Barkerville or other places where, in fact, if the community thought that this would be an added attraction, providing many jobs and keeping the money from fleeing across the border to some point south, and if it's good for their tourism, their economy, and they want it, I would have no objection to giving them a good year and hopefully working it out with them.
But surely with the government commission subtly controlled.
Absolutely.
But the moral aspect of gambling doesn't bother you. If it's good for tourism, even if it is a tax on the poor, as the lotteries are, you'd go for it regardless of your own built-in inherent principles.
Well, a tax on the poor,
Yeah.
maybe. I agree.
It's a tax on the poor.
Gambling is, especially if there's a lottery machine in every store. Now, if it's some point where you, in fact, have to travel to, and you put the money in your pocket knowing full well you may come back with nothing at all or less still, you know, you do this by choice. Now, every day somebody walks into that grocery store, they see that machine.
You'd really like to wipe them out, wouldn't you?
No?
You wouldn't. After the break. One of the great points of public controversy, Mr. Vander Zalm, is conflict of interest. Are you going to be the Premier of the province, or are you going to be the Premier of the province and a businessman with fantasy gardens? Because I'll tell you why, as you pause. You have said, not once but twice, that you would like to decentralize many government things, including the Agricultural Land Commission.
Yes.
Now, if that were decentralized, you would gain financially by dealing with the local authority instead of the ALC. You'd stand to gain financially. Is that not an intolerable conflict of interest?
Well, you see, the property at Fantasy Garden World, if that's what you're questioning me about, is fully developed. So there's nothing for me to be gained by the change of rulings from the Agricultural Land Commission, except the rezoning, which gives me a little more flexibility in what I do with the existing facilities.
Right. For instance, you've got to go back to Richmond now to alter your tenancy so you can lease things out.
That's correct.
Here you are as Premier of the province, dealing with Richmond for
Well,
that. Is that not a conflict of interest which is intolerable, basically, when one is dealing... Who can turn against the Premier of the province in these circumstances?
Or Lillian.
You, sir.
Huh?
Yes, you
Or
are.
Lillian. Yes, I agree. It's difficult.
What are your plans?
With respect to the zoning, however, I would suggest that makes very little difference, because obviously that could go against me as much as anything other, or Lillian, because the council may be politically split some way, whereby they would vote
Either way.
against me. Yes.
It's a delicate situation. Could you put it in a completely separate trust with instructions to sell, quote, at the right time, and then feel better that you're out of all conflicts?
Well, the only way you can really deal with this is to either sell it or, well, no, there's really no way you can put it into a trust. So I guess, yes, you'd have to sell the business.
Don't you feel that when you have to set the example for conflict of interests, and having chosen to become, by your popularity at the convention, the Premier, that that's what you should do? You chose to be Premier.
This is, you know, W.A.C. Bennett continued to keep his business for all of the time that he was there, and I don't think it really was a problem in any way with respect to charges for conflict. A lot of professional people run for public office. Some of the premiers are in the various provinces are lawyers. Others may be former school teachers or whatever. Certainly they too have some conflict potential for when they bring about legislation or regulations affecting their profession. So where do you draw the line? Do you take somebody, do you say, in order to be the Premier of the province of British Columbia, you can't have anything?
You must have a totally blind trust over which you have no control.
But we already know now that blind trusts don't really work either.
So therefore, your attitude is that I'm a successful businessman, I can be Premier and run my business without any conflict.
Well, I know that I can't run my business, obviously.
Your
I'm too
nominee
busy,
can run
but
your
my
business.
nominee could run the business, although I think there has to be firm guidelines governing this.
Well, let me put it to you this way, Mr. Freeman. Your perception is probably the public perception. Now, what about guidelines for your colleagues? They would fall into the same category, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think there ought to be a firm set of guidelines for those that are involved with Cabinet as to what it is they can or can't do and how it's to be done.
Anything goes except for dealing with the government. Like old WAC never sold a screwdriver to the provincial government.
that might be where it's at.
We just want to know where we stand on that one. Now, what about guidelines for the Social Credit Party and all political parties? There were many rumors from Whistler about money changing hands to influence delegates, and these have all been authoritatively denied. Were you happy about the denials?
Oh, yes. I mean, you know, it's too bad these charges might be made from time to time, but obviously there was no substance there. They would have been pursued.
Right. Would you agree with me that the cost to the delegates of that convention at Whistler would be certainly no less than $2 million?
The delegates?
No, to the leadership candidates and the cost.
Oh, the leadership
$2 million.
candidates. I'll bet you it's nearing that.
$2 or $3 million.
No, I would say nearer two, but maybe not that much, but near enough.
Are you prepared to disclose, I'm not asking you yourself, make the party disclose when such large sums of money are involved to pick a Premier, if you'll forgive the expression, off the street, that these should be published and fully, so that the public knows who put up the money for whom?
Well, then, you know, that's
open government.
Yes, but it also presents many problems in that in the case of some political parties, perhaps most of their donations come from individuals and business, whereas with other political parties it may come from individuals and, say, associations or unions and such.
Right.
And how do you, if you require the business to say, I donated $200 to Bill Vander Zalm's campaign, how do you then deal with the union or the association?
Well, I would say all donations over $2,000 or $5,000, because we're talking about big money raised very quickly for the Whistler meeting. I mean, you don't like, and I don't like the thought of large sums of money being given to a candidate. Do you?
No.
No.
No, I think it's much better if the money, which is why I ran ads in the paper seeking small donations, and that incidentally
What
was
did your
very
campaign
successful.
cost you, by the way?
We're getting the figures audited, but I would think in the order of about $150,000.
It's a hell of a lot of money. And you ran a fairly modest campaign.
Modest campaign.
You didn't take over, oh yeah, you gave lots of free meals down in your tent.
Yeah, it's a modest campaign, but you know, an airplane ticket from Vancouver to Prince George is hundreds of dollars. I think it's, what, $200 to fly to Prince George one way?
$150,000 $100 wouldn't buy you a lot of tickets to Prince George.
But it's a big province. You don't travel to only Prince George, and that's not the only expense. There are many other expenses. So I realize it's a big chunk of money.
And you realize that the
But in the
public...
course of a month, you spend a lot of money in the, you know, in all of the things that it takes to put on a good campaign.
Now, very briefly, Indian land claims. Will you have money to settle Indian land claims?
No, that's for the federal government to work out with the native
Do you
people.
believe that your government has to negotiate with the Indians at all on land claims?
No, it's for the federal government. This is how they've handled it elsewhere in the country, and I would expect they deal with it the same way in British Columbia.
Have you promised, or rather talked about promising, money for small businesses to encourage them?
No.
Haven't you?
No,
Public
would,
funding for small businesses was one thing you mentioned.
No, what I would like to see us do is consider what the functions of the BC Development Corporation. It has in the past perhaps catered more and effectively in many ways towards the bigger businesses. It's not geared or tailored towards assisting small business. And I think really the role of government might be to assist instead small businesses, and not necessarily by grants. As a matter of fact, I'm opposed to grants. I would prefer instead that we give them some protection for when it rains or when they have real problems through no fault of their own, an economic downturn all of a sudden that they're not ready for and the banks begin to close in. Maybe there should be a way from having these people go under so quickly, and perhaps we can keep them alive and get them through that rough period so they can carry on.
I'm glad
business.
you mentioned BCDC. Have you been informed or looked into the subsidy and/or loans, $25 million US, 3 years interest-free, the next 3 half of prime, to an American company called Louisiana Pacific for the establishment of a wafer board plant at Dawson Creek?
Yes,
$25 million US.
yes.
Are you aware that a cabinet report says that this will cost jobs and be an automatic target for attacking by the Americans on Countervail?
Well, I have not seen the cabinet report that you refer to. I appreciate the Americans could use that as a target for countervail, but the only, well, not the only, but certainly one of the reasons as to why it is, where in fact the government in fact decided to assist the company, was number one, it's in an area where we need the industry. Secondly, there's material there which would otherwise be waste that can now be used.
But have you made up your mind?
Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, there's 3 wafer board plants in Alberta. There's wafer board plants throughout the U.S. It's the coming thing, and all of these countries and provinces are assisting these industries in some way by grants or special loans. It seems to be the order and has been the order of the day, not just in British Columbia, actually much, much more in the U.S. especially, and similarly in other provinces throughout Canada.
And you might well go along with this to a $25 million US loan, we don't know the full extent of the subsidy, to Louisiana Pacific, who are regarded as an anti-union firm, who are going to sell 25% of the product in Canada, and about whom the Plywood Manufacturers Association fear that this will close down at least one plywood mill in BC. Have you looked at this in detail, or will you look at it in detail?
Well, the plant's half built.
$4 million in the ground, I believe.
Okay, there's a lot of money has been expended. The plant's in the process of being built, and we certainly can't renege on a contract. However, perhaps much we might agree with some aspects of it, however much we might disagree with some aspects of it, we can't renege on the contract.
It was said at the hearing in front of the Deputy Minister that the company Louisiana Pacific wanted a guarantee of a maximum of $8 an hour for wages. They were not given it. But this is a company well known in the Northwest. Do you think this is a good investment for British Columbia and a wafer board plant with all this money? Will you disclose the full terms and details of the agreement when you have a chance?
Well, if that's their labor stance, I certainly have trouble with that, number one. As to whether we need a wafer board plant and how this might compete with plywood, I think plywood will have its place in the manufacture of furniture and such like.
You were against this plant when you spoke up in the North, were you not?
No, I wasn't against the plant. I certainly...
Against the subsidies?
I questioned the subsidy.
Will you still question them?
The plant's partially built. It's done.
You're
It's
now
there.
committed to the
An agreement-
Louisiana Pacific deal.
An agreement has been entered into, and I don't think you would want our government to renege on a contract. That would certainly have tremendous implications in our future dealings with any other company.
Maybe it
anywhere.
was a bad deal because the cabinet report said it would cost jobs in BC. Did they get the timber license?
I don't believe it'll cost jobs. I think it'll create jobs.
Did they get the timber license?
They did get their... well, I don't know what the status of it. I know it was in the process a week or 10 days ago, so I expect it.
But with open government now, it'd be easy enough for reporters like myself to phone the BCDC and say, give us all the facts.
Hopefully. I think it should be that way.
More with Premier Vander Zalm. I may get a chance to do some phone calls, if anybody still remembers them after 6 months, after the break. This has not been my day, Mr. Premier. 3 things. 1, a slip of the tongue at the beginning, not too bad. It's the word that Monroe uses all the time. 2, you, with respect, deference, and humility, were late. And 3, we put up the wrong phone numbers. So nothing else can go wrong.
It'll be great from here on in. You
Four-
make a few mistakes at first. You get them over with.
420-3336. Couple of short questions, perfectly simple. Knowing the attitude of your new Minister of Energy, Jack Davis, very skilled man at his task, Site C and the construction thereof, is that now officially down the tube?
No. I would
What?
hope that we can find a way to commence the project soon. But Jack wants to be assured, and I do too, but he won't bring it to government until he is, nor should he, that there will be sufficient revenues from the sale of the power that in fact it will not only pay for the facility and the installation of it, but also give some additional monies to the coffers of British Columbia and see the facility come back to us.
You're giving me
in a
the old
period of
social
years.
credit line, that it's possible to build at vast cost, while we've got all the return power from the Columbia to sell, a dam and sell it long range to the Americans to pay for both the power and the dam?
This is what we want to know before we commit to proceed. You know,
In
the
other words,
BC
just-
Hydro has done a ton of expensive studies. A lot of them aren't worth the paper they're written on now because we're not proceeding and things will change. What we don't want to see happening is ourselves going down the line, creating a lot of studies and expense, only to find out we can't find the necessary market or get the right price
Okay.
for the product. If we can get the right price for the product and
If-
sell sufficient of it, we'll proceed with the project.
And the same goes with the Vancouver Island gas pipeline.
Well, that one, of course, is a little different in that we have the involvement of the federal government there. The
You mean a
federal
subsidy?
government, the federal government has committed a lump sum of money, which they've collected from across the country, for the purposes of installing gas pipelines to areas such as Vancouver Island. They've spent their monies back east, but they haven't spent any monies here. We have about, I think it's somewhere in the order of 250, 300 million coming from them. So they must make that commitment in order for us to proceed.
But anyway, Bill Vander Zalm is quite prepared to accept and give all the subsidies he can, and is not an out-and-out free enterpriser, stand on your own feet or starve.
I don't like subsidies. Sorry, I don't like subsidies, and I realize now occasionally we're going to have to get into programs where we possibly provide a loan that otherwise might not be provided through the normal banking institutions in order to get a business off the ground, because we're competing with other provinces and with the United States where they're doing this sort of thing regularly. I don't like it. I want to minimize that tremendously.
Right. Let me look at the things you've promised to cut already. Transit levy, that's gone.
It's done.
You're going to find that money from somewhere else.
Well, we were fortunate this year because of the increased ridership. We got it from the revenue through the fare box.
For 1 year only.
We don't know what the fare, what the usage of the system will be. The SkyTrain is what makes the difference here next year, so it's hard to tell.
Sales tax off restaurant meals for sure.
That will be a priority for me because I think that's an inequitable tax. If you eat for $6.99, there's no tax. If you eat for $7, you pay the tax. I don't think it's fair.
You'll be screaming at Ottawa for more equalization payments to a poverty-stricken British Columbia?
I think the equalization program ought to be reviewed by Ottawa with us in order to bring about equity. Manitoba gets many, many dollars, and we don't get anything. We're still paying out, and we've probably got much more unemployment because of our resource base than what some of the other provinces do, including Manitoba.
What do you see? Have you any real strategy, or are you merely going on about acres of new greenhouses to ship lettuces east on subsidized airlines? I mean, do you have any real plans for the employment of the youth in British Columbia? Are you, for instance, planning an intensive reforestry program which we could run pretty well year-round?
Well, you said at the start of the program that Bill Vander Zalm has been Premier 1 month. It's not even quite a month, so you can't get all of this done, especially when you inherit a number of things after months of sort of, you know, a lot of things being put on the back burner. So there's much that had to be done immediately, and I've not been able to address all of these things. What we're now doing through the Economic Development Committee of Cabinet, and again at the workshop session that we're holding in Prince George at the end of this week for 3 days, is we're developing ways and means within government to see where we might reduce regulations, legislation, in order to provide greater opportunities in areas such as mining or forestry or fishing or agriculture. Similarly, we are hoping to develop ways and means to attract investment to British Columbia so people from outside will invest. And I think we're already moving some ways towards that by helping to bring about, hopefully, a more reliable labor management climate.
And of course, you're going to definitely bring in no strikes for civil servants. Is that correct?
Well, I've gotten along very well with the BCGEU, and I think if they want to use the power of strike as provided in legislation, then they can do so except in essential services.
In other words, same as usual as before.
Well, I think we're fooling ourselves, and we're fooling the people that belong to the union to say that you have the power to strike, but the moment we'll take care of you under the essential services legislation. I think we'd be fairer and more upfront if we dealt with the union to find out which are the essential services and to simply take them out for strike.
Have you yet looked at the rather troublesome development in which there's more than $1 billion public money, federal and provincial, Northeast coal? Do you see nothing but continued trouble ahead in Northeast coal? And of course the mines in the Kootenays where you were promising jobs the other week, they're in bad shape.
Yes, some of the mines in
Nothing
the
going to subsidize them?
Some of the mines in the Northeast, and similarly so in the Southeast, are having considerable problem because of the price of coal at the moment and the market for coal. I think this will change, but certainly now they're having some difficulties. And that's one of the risks you run in a resource-based community. I don't know what we can do about that. We wouldn't have guessed that, I guess, 5 years ago. Now it's with us. Mm-hmm. Who knows what it'll be 3 years from now?
I wonder if Mr. Vander Zalm is going to change a little bit. I wonder if you're going to fall into the accepted pattern of the normal businessman establishment premier. Do you feel that's kind of happening to you already? When you look at that Louisiana Pacific deal, I would have thought you'd have screamed your head off about it.
You can't change what's been done, and we can't begin to worry now about contracts that were entered into then. They are there. We've got to abide by those contracts. And Bill Vander Zalm obviously is bound to change some. I'm getting
older.
I'm getting older, mellower. No, not really. But naturally, as you take on the position and learn about the various stances that need to be taken with respect to federal, provincial relations, or for that matter, international relations, all of these things need to be done differently from what I've been accustomed to. So it's a learning process for me as well, and that will perhaps affect in some ways how I do things. But basically, you can be assured that there won't be such change, that Bill Vander Zalm won't stick by his principles.
I got to ask this one. Did you and Kamloops say that the recession was a blessing from God, so that people would appreciate the way things are now? It was needed?
I remember reading that report in the paper.
Mm-hmm. That's what I got it.
And it was badly taken out of context.
If you said it, you withdraw it.
If I said it, I withdraw it. But I didn't say it. I know what I did say. I know what I did say, and it's quite different from the way it appeared in the paper.
Downey, congratulations on your appointment of Mr. Justice Hutchin. But did you meet with the industry over the weekend?
No, not officially.
Unofficially?
I've had people from industry call me over the weekend. I've had people from the IWA come by over the weekend to talk to me. And frankly, that's one of the advantages of having a place where people can see you a little more freely on your day off. I don't take off to the beach.
Who came
or
to see
a
you from
cabin.
the
I came
industry?
I don't need to reveal the names of those that
who came from the union
by. And
over the weekend?
Again, they were simply members that wanted to relay their concerns to someone in government, and there I was.
Available for lobbying at Fantasy Gardens at the weekend?
I don't call it lobbying. I call it good communications, and that should be available for people. Well, lobbying makes it sound as though somebody's getting paid to do something for somebody else, and that's not at all the case.
Questions to Mr. Well, that's terrible tonight. That's because you were late.
It's warm under the lights, isn't it?
I'll be back after with phone calls after break. How'd you like to go to phones, Mr. Premier?
Great. I look forward to that.
So do I. Where did I go to from Abbotsford? Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. Hello, Bill.
Hello.
An old friend of yours from Abbotsford calling.
Probably went to school with you in Abbotsford.
Well, let's leave the
Oh,
old...
not that old.
Oh, not that old, thank you.
What's the question or the comment?
The question is this. We in Abbotsford are very anxious for Bill to run for us in a by-election or in the next general election. I'm wondering, first of all, whether he's made his mind up, and if he hasn't, when he thinks he might know where he's going to run.
Okay, good question.
Well, I need to obviously decide on a by-election in the not-too-distant future, unless there were a general election. There's a by-election that has to be called in South Peace before the 28th of October. So that gives us some time, or gives me some time, although I would prefer to have an elected position, because if the House were called back right now as it is, I'd have to sit up in the gallery as opposed to sitting on the floor.
Well, you might choose a double seat and run with Bud Smith as your running mate.
No, we're a double seat. You see, until
until
for example, Abbotsford is a double riding right now. That is for a general election, but it wouldn't be for a by-election. As a matter of fact, it's not even available at the moment because Mr. Bill Ritchie is still the MLA from the area. So I need to look at an area where there is no sitting MLA, and the only one at present is South Peace.
How long to call a general election? 28 days?
It takes 28 days after you call it for the vote.
You're a little bit tempted by that, though, aren't you?
Well, I suppose sometimes I might.
While
be
you're
a
still
little
popular.
bit- What do you mean, while I'm still popular, Jack? I've been this way for many years. Now, don't forget, we've had these sessions before.
You've had your ups and downs.
That's right.
Go ahead, please. Hello. Oh, wrong one. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Vander Zalm about earlier proposals of handing the liquor distribution back to the private sector.
When are you going to sell the liquor stores off?
Well, my proposal, and
Go on.
this was a proposal that I made earlier on, and I stand by this, that we are now introducing the private liquor store into rural communities in various parts of British Columbia. We've not yet brought it down to the lower mainland especially, and I suppose in part because it was political too. I think we should instead, however, be taking those things that can be dealt with through the private sector and make them competitive out there in the private sector.
Mr.
So
Vander Zalm.
as areas become available, rather than opening up another government liquor store, I would prefer personally to see it as a private store.
Well, in other words, you've modified your policy, obviously misunderstood by the public. And your policy now is, said he with respect, that where a new store opens, it'll be in private hands, but you will not close any of the big downtown specialty stores or the stores in major centres. Is that a correct
Okay,
summation?
but that's not a change. That's always been so.
other
I've
words,
said
you-
I wouldn't put people out of their jobs, but I would be working towards private stores where because of growth in an area, another store is required.
But
It should
no
be a private
radical
store.
changes.
Nothing radical, not to put people out or to create a big fuss with our friends in the BCG.
But you see how you can be misunderstood. Vander Zalm wants to privatize liquor stores. Everybody thinks he's going to sell it, like in Quebec, to the private entrepreneurs, and the answer is no, you're not.
Jack, this is one of the difficulties, you know. You get the mics put to your face and the questions asked, and you've been at this many a time.
But you're the man
and
that
what
speaks.
I know, but what you say and what appears in the end through the media is not always the same because it's shortened. You can't give it all of the time that it takes to explain it
Not with
oftentimes.
me, Mr. Vander Zalm. That's why I just corrected you just now and said that you never had a plan to close or sell all the liquor
No,
stores in
that's
BC.
right. That's right.
Right. You're modifying what obviously was your stand at one time.
No.
Sell all the liquor stores.
No, I never said that. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Vander Zalm.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Not too bad, thank you.
I was just going to comment on unemployment. I was thinking one of the main reasons that I feel the unemployment is so high is because of the minimum wage, and that is $3.65 an hour right now. And I was wondering, how much longer will it be before it rises from that, so that people have more incentive to go out and look for work?
Well,
You
know,
think that's high enough just now, the $3.65 minimum wage?
No, I don't think there's many people paying, in fact, the $3.65, unless it's the sort of business where the revenue, and this is so in the tourism industry perhaps more than anywhere else, where the revenue comes from tips or gratuities as opposed to from, say, the salary. But I couldn't hire somebody for $3.65 and expect them to survive, and I doubt if very few people do.
I remember when you offered people $3 an hour and a shovel and they wouldn't take it. Erickson.
That's a few years ago, yes.
Go ahead, please. But you don't think the minimum wage should be increased, do you?
Well, I don't know how to deal with this whole minimum wage question, and perhaps there's people may have some suggestions for me, and if so, and they can't get in on the air tonight, please write. I don't know what the solution there.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Vander Zalm?
Yes?
Yes, I was interested in asking you about your position as stated on the occasion of the 13,750,000th customer at Expo. On that occasion, you stated that the taxpayers of British Columbia did not have to worry about paying for the Expo deficit because that debt would be paid for by the funds from the lottery.
That's correct.
What I don't understand is if the projected deficit is $300 million, and I believe that the annual revenues from the lotteries to the provincial coffers are $30 million, and if we assume that there's a 10% interest charge on the deficit, then it seems to me that the lotteries are unable to pay for the deficit, and that most of that income is going towards paying the interest charges.
Well, the revenue from the 649 lottery is considerably more than the $30 million. I don't have the figure, but as I understand it, we could, in fact, through lotteries, pay off, it seems to me, something like in the order of $6 million a month.
You think that Expo will have cost us nothing?
It will cost us, of course, and it'll be repaid not through tax dollars or direct tax dollars, but instead from lottery proceeds. And that's, you know, there will be a deficit, if we can call it that, although I don't like using the word deficit because it's really an investment.
When are you going to call the House?
I would hope in the spring, early spring.
Early spring, having had an election.
Who's to know?
My thanks to Premier Bill Vander Zalm, the province of British Columbia, in office since August the 6th.
I'm honored, Jack, that I could be on your program first, and I'm grateful and hope to return again.
Thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
I shall be back after the break. One thing is for sure is that with Bill Vander Zalm for Premier, we won't run short of news material, but you've got to watch. You know, Mr. Vander Zalm will comment on most things at the drop of a hat, and we must be careful to interpret them as accurately and as best we can. So tomorrow on the new Webster Live at 5, we're going to go after Bob Skelly, the leader of the opposition in the House of Commons, who might be a little less gentle than I was about some of the interpretations of Mr. Vander Zalm's potential policies. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. precisely. Stay tuned for Tony.